My mother lifted her wine glass, smiled across the table, and said, "Tonight is about family. Your brother finally closed on his first home." Everyone clapped. My brother grinned, pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and shook a set of new house keys over the candlelight like he was showing off a trophy. Then my mother looked straight at me and added, in the same calm voice, "Of course, none of this would have happened without your VA loan." The whole table laughed softly, like I was supposed to be touched. My father leaned back in his chair and said, "You weren't using it. Your brother actually needs a life." I looked down at my plate. I said nothing. Not because I was shocked. Not because I was weak. And not because I didn't know exactly what they had done. I stayed quiet because less than an hour earlier, a JAG officer had told me, if they're really going to say it out loud in front of witnesses, let them. So I did. I let my mother keep talking. I let my father keep digging. I let my brother keep smiling. Because tucked inside the leather folder under my chair was a printed copy of the closing file. And standing in the hallway outside my parents' dining room were a JAG officer, a VA loan fraud investigator, and a courier from the title company who had one job: to stop everything. Before I tell you how my own family tried to use my military service to buy my brother a house, tell me in the comments, if your family crossed a line like this, would you expose them in public or handle it quietly and let them find out the hard way? My name is Alina. I was the dependable one in my family. You probably know the type. The child who doesn't cause trouble. The one who leaves home, works hard, sends money when people fall behind, remembers birthdays, pays for little emergencies, and never makes a scene. I joined the army at 19. Not because my family was patriotic. Not because they believed in service. And definitely not because they believed in me. I joined because I was tired of growing up in a house where every good thing belonged to my brother by default, and every sacrifice somehow belonged to me. My brother, Caleb, was older by 2 years, but my parents treated him like he was some fragile investment that could still pay off if they just protected him long enough. When he quit school, they said he was finding himself. When he wrecked my mother's car, they said he was under pressure. When he maxed out 2 credit cards and begged my father for money, they called it a rough patch. But when I worked double shifts, studied late, and signed my enlistment papers, my father only said, "Good, at least one child will learn discipline." Even then, I didn't fully understand what that meant in our house. It meant this: if I succeeded, it was available. If I earned something, it was shareable. If I built anything, my family believed it could be redirected toward Caleb. The first time I heard the phrase, VA loan, I was still relatively new in the service. An older woman in my unit had used hers to buy a modest home near base. She explained it carefully: eligibility, occupancy, lender rules, the benefit of it, and how precious it was because it wasn't just money. It was a door, a chance, a form of stability that many of us didn't grow up with. I remember going back to the barracks that night and thinking, one day, I'm going to use that benefit wisely. I didn't dream about some huge house. I dreamed about safety. A small place with a quiet kitchen. A room where no one could open the door without permission. A table where nobody could shame me for earning what I had. That dream kept me going through deployments, long training cycles, missed holidays, and every family phone call that somehow ended with my mother asking if I could help your brother just this once. At first, the requests were small. A utility bill. A security deposit. A phone payment. Then it became normal. When Caleb wanted to start a business, I paid for the website after my mother cried on the phone about how this could change his life. When that failed, I paid to keep his truck from being repossessed. When he got engaged and needed money for a venue deposit, my father called me from the kitchen and said, "You don't have children. You can afford to support your family." I said no to that one. That was the first time my father hung up on me. For 3 weeks, nobody in my family called. Then my mother reached out like nothing had happened, asked how I was sleeping, told me she missed me, and sent me a picture of Caleb at a furniture store with the caption, "Someday he'll have a real home." A real home. That phrase would come back later. Months passed. I stayed busy. I was scheduled for a long training rotation and then attached to a stateside assignment with a heavy operational tempo. My life became lists, early mornings, late reports, and the kind of tired silence that makes even your own apartment feel like a waiting room. My family still called, but less often. And when they did, the tone had changed. They were unusually pleasant. My mother asked thoughtful questions. My father stopped making those little jabs about the army. Caleb even texted me once, "Proud of you, sis." That should have made me suspicious. Instead, it made me hopeful. I thought maybe adulthood had finally done what years of disappointment couldn't. I thought maybe people changed. Then one Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was leaving an office briefing. It was a credit monitoring alert. A hard inquiry. Mortgage-related. I frowned and opened the app right there in the hallway. At first, I thought it had to be an error. I hadn't applied for anything. I definitely hadn't applied for a mortgage. Then I saw the lender name. And underneath it, an address in my hometown. My pulse went cold. I called the number immediately. The woman who answered spoke the way people do when they assume a conversation is routine. She confirmed my name. Confirmed my last four. Then she said, "Yes, ma'am, I see your VA-backed loan file here. Is this about the scheduled closing?" I stopped walking. The hallway around me seemed to tilt. I said, "No, it's about the fact that I never applied for a VA-backed loan." Silence. Then keyboard clicks. Then a different tone. "Ma'am, please hold." I stood there staring at the cinderblock wall while the hold music buzzed in my ear. A man picked up next. More careful, more formal. He asked if I was in a safe place to talk. That question told me everything before he even said it. There was a loan application under my name. Not just a pre-approval. A full file. Primary borrower, Elena Marquez. Property address, a 3-bedroom house in my hometown. Occupancy intention. Borrower intends to use the property as her primary residence. Electronic signatures had been completed. Income documents had been uploaded. A certificate of eligibility had been pulled. And the file had moved so far that closing was scheduled within 48 hours. I remember gripping the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. I asked the obvious question. How is that possible? The man on the line said the lender had received all required documentation through a verified email account and a phone number associated with the file. Neither one belonged to me. At least, not directly. The email was a variation of my name. And the phone number. It was my mother's old number, the one she'd kept for years before she changed plans and temporarily let Caleb use it. That was the moment my stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down on the hallway bench. My family hadn't stumbled into some gray area. They had built a whole lie. A lie in my name. The lender froze the file temporarily and told me to report the matter immediately. I went straight to base legal. Within 2 hours, I was sitting across from a JAG officer named Captain Reed. He listened without interrupting. He didn't overreact. He didn't offer dramatic sympathy. He just asked precise questions. Did anyone in my family ever have access to my personal documents? Yes. Had I ever sent them tax returns, LES statements, or identification copies for anything? Years ago, yes. My mother once needed my W-2 for a scholarship form for Caleb, and another time asked for my ID because the insurance company needed family verification. Had I noticed missing mail? Not recently. Had I ever verbally agreed to help my brother buy a house? Never. He nodded and wrote for a moment. Then he said, "This is serious. If the documents were submitted without your knowledge and they certified occupancy falsely, this may involve identity fraud, mortgage fraud, and misuse of VA-backed loan eligibility." Hearing it said out loud should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, it made me feel sick. Because a stranger had just explained my family to me more honestly than I ever had. Captain Reed coordinated with the lender's fraud division, and by the next morning I was speaking to a VA loan investigator. She was sharp, direct, and unimpressed by excuses. When I told her I suspected my parents and brother, she didn't gasp. She said, "Families do this more often than people realize." That hurt in a way I didn't expect, because I had spent years translating betrayal into obligation. But in her voice, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. By the end of that day, we had a timeline. The fake email account had been created months earlier. My pay stubs and tax documents had been uploaded from a home IP address in my hometown. The e-signatures had been completed from the same area. A voicemail left for the lender came from a male voice, identifying himself as the borrower's authorized contact. It was Caleb. There was also a signed occupancy statement saying I would move into the property within 60 days. That part made the investigator audibly sigh. "Your brother wanted the house," she said, "but your entitlement was the engine." I didn't cry. Not then. I waited until I got back to my apartment. Then I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and stared at the wall for nearly an hour. Not because I couldn't believe my family had done it. Deep down I could. What broke me was how calmly they had done it. How organized they had been. How long they had planned it. And how naturally they must have spoken about it when I wasn't there. At some point, someone in that house had said, "Let's use Alina, VA benefit." And nobody had said no. The investigator recommended freezing the file and referring the matter forward. Captain Reed recommended I say nothing to my family until the documentation was secured. But the title company needed one more thing. If the closing had already happened by the time the fraud flag fully processed, they wanted a contemporaneous statement from me, and ideally, a witness event confirming that my family believed they had authority to use my benefit. That's when my mother called. Her timing was almost funny. She sounded cheerful. She said they were doing a family dinner on Sunday because your brother has exciting news. I let her talk. I let her invite me. I let her say, "Don't be difficult, Alina. This is important to the family." Then I said I'd be there. Captain Reed looked at me after I hung up and asked, "Do you want to go?" I asked, "Can I?" He paused. Then he said, "If you stay calm, say very little and let them talk, yes." So I drove home on Sunday wearing a simple blouse and slacks, not my uniform. I parked down the street and sat in the car for a moment. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Maybe because by then, grief had burned into clarity. Inside the house, everything smelled like rosemary chicken and polished wood. My mother had lit candles. My father had opened expensive wine he only brought out when he wanted to perform success. Caleb was already there with his fiancée, smiling like a man who thought he'd finally outrun his own life. He hugged me when I walked in. Actually hugged me. And said, "Couldn't have happened without family." I looked at him and wondered if he heard himself. Dinner moved like theater. My mother served too much food. My father made smug little comments about real estate being the smartest investment. Caleb kept checking his phone and grinning. His fiancée, Brianna, looked confused every time the others exchanged those private, satisfied glances. I realized she probably didn't know the full truth. Then came the toast. My mother stood. She tapped her glass. And she made the announcement. Tonight is about family. Your brother finally closed on his first home. Clapping. Smiles. Pride. Then the line that split the room open. Of course, none of this would have happened without your VA loan. My father added, you weren't using it. Your brother actually needs a life. Caleb shook the keys and laughed. Relax, it's just paperwork. You'll barely notice. Barely notice. My name on a mortgage. My benefit tied up. My credit risked. My future homeownership compromised. And I was supposed to barely notice. I took a sip of water. My mother misread my silence and kept going. We were going to tell you after everything settled, she said, but I told them honesty is better. You're still family. My father looked at me with that same hard expression he used whenever he expected obedience. You owe your brother support, he said. He's building something. I said, with my name. The room went very still for one beat. Just one. Then Caleb forced a smile. Don't be dramatic, he said. It's temporary. Temporary. People always say theft is temporary when they think they'll keep the reward. I set my glass down carefully. And because Captain Reed had told me witnesses matter, I asked the simplest question possible. Did all of you know my VA benefit was used on the loan? My mother answered first. Don't make it sound ugly. My father said, of course we knew. Caleb rolled his eyes. Mom handled the paperwork stuff. There it was. I didn't have to trap them. They handed it to me. I reached under my chair, took out the leather folder, and placed it on the table. My brother's smile faded a fraction. My mother's posture changed. My father narrowed his eyes. I said, good, then we won't need to waste time pretending. My mother laughed nervously. Elena, what is this? I stood up, walked to the entryway, and opened the front door. Captain Reed stepped inside first. Calm, formal, controlled. Behind him came the VA loan investigator, Ms. Holloway, and a representative from the title company carrying a sealed packet. No one in my family moved. I have never forgotten the look on my brother's face in that moment. It wasn't guilt first. It was disbelief. Because people like Caleb never imagine consequences arriving in a pressed uniform and a dark suit. My mother stood abruptly. What is this? Captain Reed didn't raise his voice. He simply said, my name is Captain Reed. I am here at Ms. Marquez's request regarding a disputed VA-backed mortgage transaction. My father shot to his feet. You can't come into my house accusing us of things. Ms. Holloway replied before anyone else could. Actually, sir, the matter has already been referred for fraud review. We're here because statements have been made in front of witnesses that directly concern the loan file. Caleb's fiancée whispered, what loan file? No one answered her. I opened the leather folder and slid one paper toward the center of the table. It was the occupancy certification. The one claiming I intended to live in the property as my primary residence. My signature sat at the bottom. Not my real signature. A neat digital imitation. Ms. Holloway placed another document beside it. The e-sign log. IP addresses. Timestamps. Email records. Then came the file note, where the lender documented a phone conversation with borrower's authorized contact. Caleb went pale when she read part of it aloud. My father tried to recover first. He pointed at me and said, she agreed to help. She's changing her story. Captain Reed looked at me. Ms. Marquez, did you authorize this loan? No. Did you authorize anyone to sign, certify occupancy, or act on your behalf? No. Ms. Holloway turned to my father. Sir, under the file currently under review, false occupancy certification, use of another party's eligibility without consent, and identity misrepresentation are all being examined. This transaction is now frozen. My mother's face lost all color. Frozen, she repeated. The title company representative stepped forward, and handed my brother a document. Disbursement and final recording are suspended pending fraud determination. Caleb stared at the page like it was written in another language. My mother looked at me with sudden panic. "Alina, stop this. We're family." I think that was the moment something in me finally hardened all the way through. Because after everything, after the planning, the deceit, the signatures, the lies, they still thought the word family worked like a remote control. Press it, and I would go soft. Press it, and I would remember my role. Press it, and I would save them from what they themselves had done. I said, "You should have remembered that before you forged my name." Brianna stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She looked at Caleb and said, "You told me your parents were helping with the house. You never said it was hers." Caleb snapped, "It's complicated." She laughed once, sharp, ugly, disbelieving. "No," she said, "fraud isn't complicated." Then she picked up her purse and left. My brother actually tried to go after her, but Ms. Holloway's next sentence stopped him cold. "We also have reason to believe supporting income documents and identity materials were submitted from the Marquez residence. Preservation notices are already in process." My mother grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. My father tried anger again, because anger was always his last shelter. "You're destroying this family over paperwork." I looked at him and said, "No, I'm refusing to let you destroy my future over it." That shut him up. Not forever, but long enough. Captain Reed asked that the conversation remain civil and reminded everyone that further statements could be relevant. My mother started crying then. Real tears. But even in that moment, I noticed something. She never cried because she had hurt me. She cried because the plan had failed. Because the house might be gone. Because the people at the table now knew exactly who she was. Caleb finally found his voice. He said, "I was going to refinance in a year. You would have been off it." I almost laughed. "A year," I said. "You stole a benefit I earned in uniform, tied my name to a property I never agreed to buy, certified I'd live in a house I've never even seen, and I'm supposed to be grateful because you plan to clean it up later." He had no answer. My father muttered, "This could ruin him." I said, "You weren't worried about ruining me." Silence. Heavy. Hot. Final. The title company representative collected the packet signatures acknowledging receipt. Ms. Holloway informed them of next steps. The lender would continue the fraud investigation. The VA-related misrepresentation would remain flagged. If necessary, law enforcement referrals could follow. Captain Reed advised me not to engage further without documentation. Then he asked if I was ready to leave. I looked at the table one last time. The candles were still burning. The plates were still half full. The keys sat next to Caleb's hand, suddenly meaningless. My mother whispered, "Alina, please." I don't know what she expected. A hug. A compromise. A daughter willing to trade her future for their comfort one more time. Instead, I said the truest thing I had ever said in that house. "You all spent years teaching me that silence was maturity. Tonight you learned it was evidence." Then I walked out. You would think that was the end. It was. Consequences move slower than shock. The next 2 weeks were a blur of statements, affidavits, calls, and paperwork. The lender's fraud division confirmed the loan file had been built using stolen personal data and unauthorized submissions. The fake email account was traced. The phone records were matched. The occupancy certification became a central issue because VA-backed loans are not a family gift card. They're tied to the veteran, to the property rules, to intent, to law. The transaction unraveled fast once the lies were laid side by side. The seller relisted the property. The broker withdrew. The title company protected itself. And my brother, who had apparently already posted a photo of the house keys on social media with the caption, "Hard work pays off," deleted it within a day. Brianna ended the engagement. I heard that from my aunt, who called pretending she just wanted peace. What she actually wanted was to see whether guilt still worked on me. It didn't. My father sent one email. Just one. It said, "You made your point. Drop it before strangers ruin your brother's life." I forwarded it to my file folder and never replied. My mother called from different numbers 3 times. Left voicemails about stress, family, humiliation, and how people are talking. Not one of those messages included the words "I'm sorry." Caleb sent the most honest message of all. He wrote, "I never thought you'd go that far." That line stayed with me. Not because it hurt, because it clarified everything. He never thought I'd go that far. Meaning, he had measured my entire life correctly. He knew I had tolerated too much. He knew I had covered, softened, excused, and absorbed. He had counted on the version of me they built in that house. Useful, silent, reliable. What he didn't account for was this. Service changed me. Not into someone colder. Into someone clearer. I had spent years in environments where paperwork mattered, chain of command mattered, integrity mattered, and lying on official documents was not brushed away with a family dinner. Once I stopped seeing my family as an emotional exception to reality, the whole structure collapsed. The fallout continued for a while. A few extended relatives sided with my parents at first. Mostly the ones who only heard the softened version. Elena embarrassed the family. Elena brought officers into her parents' home. Elena overreacted over a misunderstanding. Then the details started spreading. The forged signature. The false occupancy. The fake email. The attempted mortgage under my name. Funny how quickly misunderstanding becomes unfortunate decision-making once facts show up. I didn't need to defend myself much after that. Truth travels slowly at first, and then all at once. About a month later, I got a confirmation that my VA loan eligibility remained protected because the misuse had been reported in time and documented properly. I cried in my car when I read that email. Not because everything was fixed, but because something sacred hadn't been permanently stained by people who never respected it. I took leave later that summer and drove to a small town 2 hours from base. There was a little house there. Nothing dramatic. 2 bedrooms, white siding, quiet street. A narrow porch. The kind of place people overlook because it doesn't scream success. It whispered peace. I stood in the empty living room during the showing and felt something unfamiliar. Not victory. Not revenge. Relief. The kind that settles deep in your bones when your life finally belongs to you more than it belongs to your history. I didn't buy it immediately. I waited. I ran every number carefully. I asked every question twice. I read everything. Because when family has used your trust as a tool, caution becomes a form of self-respect. 3 months later, I closed on that house. My house. Using my benefit. My documents. My choice. I told almost no one. Not out of fear. Out of peace. I bought 1 kitchen table and 4 mismatched chairs from a local shop. The first night there, I ate takeout noodles under a cheap warm light with the windows open and no voices telling me what I owed. No one had keys except me. No one had copies of my papers. No one knew the code to the gate. And for the first time in my life, the future felt like a room with a lock I controlled. My mother eventually wrote me a long letter. Actual paper. Pages of it. Most of it was what you'd expect. She said she had only wanted to help Caleb. She said the market was moving fast. She said your father pushed. She said we thought you'd understand eventually. She said people make mistakes. Buried halfway through page 3 was the closest thing to truth. She wrote, "I suppose I believed that because you always survived, The cost to you would be smaller than the cost to him. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I folded the letter and put it away. Because there it was. The family math of my childhood. Let Alina carry it. Let Alina absorb it. Let Alina survive it. She always does. Maybe some of you listening know exactly what that feels like. Being loved for your resilience more than you're respected for your boundaries. Being praised for your strength, while that same strength is used as an excuse to burden you again. If that's you, hear me carefully. Surviving something does not mean you were meant to carry it. And being the strong one does not make other people entitled to your peace. As for my father, he never apologized. He sent a message once through my aunt saying he would have handled things differently if he'd known the government would get involved. Not if he'd known I would be hurt. Not if he'd known it could damage my future. If he'd known there would be consequences. That told me all I needed to know. Caleb bounced between excuses for months. At one point, he claimed my mother had done most of the paperwork. At another, he insisted everyone uses creative financing. Eventually, even he got tired of hearing himself. Last I heard, he was renting a condo farther out of town and blaming the economy. Maybe he tells people his sister ruined his chance at homeownership. Maybe he believes it. People who build their lives on borrowed integrity usually do. But here's what I know. I didn't ruin his future. I interrupted his theft. And those are not the same thing. The strangest part of all this is what happened afterward online. One distant cousin, who had heard some butchered version of the story, commented on one of my photos and wrote, "Family should be handled privately." I almost responded. Then I decided not to. Because she was right in one way. Family should be handled privately. Privately, honestly, respectfully, before they forge your name and try to turn your service into a shortcut for someone else. After that, privacy becomes a luxury they already spent. So if you're wondering whether I regret opening the door and letting Captain Reed walk in that night, I don't. Not for 1 second. That dinner was the first time my silence worked for me. I didn't scream. I didn't throw plates. I didn't beg. I let them say exactly who they were. And then I let the files speak. That's the thing people like my family never understand. They think quiet people don't fight back. But some of us are just waiting until the evidence is complete. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments, what was the real betrayal here? The forged VA loan, the family dinner humiliation, or the fact that they expected her to forgive it because they said the word family? And if you believe silence is not weakness but timing, subscribe and stay with me. Because some betrayals don't end in shouting. Some end when the right door opens, the right file lands on the table, and the whole room finally has to read what you already know. That night, my mother raised her glass and said the house existed because of me. She was right. Just not in the way she thought. Because the moment they used my name without my permission, they didn't buy a house. They built the case that destroyed it. And when the JAG officer opened the closing file, the room didn't just go silent. For the first time in my life, it told the truth.